Heyo, welcome back to the Undrafted and Unqualified Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Anthony. I'm here with Vinny. A beautiful snowy day, so we're here on Zoom again. We got about 3 feet where we are. Hopefully, y'all are enjoying the snow as well. I know it hit most of the United States,
Yeah,
so hopefully y'all are handling the snow okay. We're off on school at least. We're in grad school, so we don't have classes, which is super nice. But yeah, lot of snow. Hopefully you're enjoying it.
yeah. And then also, hopefully you didn't lose power to be able to enjoy the playoff games yesterday,
Yeah.
as we're recording on Monday. But yeah, some great games, especially the Seahawks Rams game. But it was super cool, I will say, to watch the Patriots Broncos game just because of the weather. I feel like
Yeah.
that's just like shows how cool football is. That's the only sport that will let that happen and like not cancel the game or not delay the game, and play through those conditions. So that was a cool thing to watch, honestly, for me, even though I didn't have a ring in the fight.
Yeah, I mean Seahawks Rams has been an awesome rivalry all year.
Yep,
Me as a Pats fan, I'm pretty hyped we're
yep.
going to the bowl. Doesn't feel real to be honest with you. Like I don't feel like this team is like the
I know.
same that it used to be where it was dominating, but it's a good team. It's a good team we got there. We're the first team, I think, ever, I want to say, to beat three teams in the top five in total defense. Chargers were number five, Houston number one, Denver number two, and honestly, I'd imagine Seattle's number three. So Seattle's going to be by far the toughest test yet because they have the best offense. But yeah, we've been running through some tough defenses so far this playoffs. So it's cool to see like that we're still holding our own and still winning these games. But yeah,
Yeah, it really is crazy. Like it feels like I saw yesterday it was 6 years since Brady left.
yeah,
And that like it feels like it was so much longer or shorter, honestly. It like it feels like you guys were like just in this, but like I don't know. It's crazy. And honestly, it's like you mentioned the defenses, but Drake Mays really hasn't showed up at all this postseason, and he hasn't had to, which is, I guess you could say the conditions of last game played a role. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think like it sounds weird, but this is their first true test, like
okay,
in the Super Bowl. And like so that's pretty rare, like that you say that, but it'll be interesting. I think it's gonna like they're definitely gonna be pretty heavy underdogs, but I don't know. It hasn't mattered most of the season. They've kind of been doubted, myself included. So we'll see what happens. I'm excited to watch the game.
yeah. I mean, we're going in as 4.5 point underdogs. I think this is the most complete team we have faced. If
Yeah,
Bo Nix was there
definitely.
instead of Stidham, it's a completely different story. But that Broncos team as a whole is very good. I think
Yeah,
weather became a big factor. But yeah, I think overall, like we've had some tough defenses to play, but like CJ Stroud, he was terrible
yeah,
against us. Although that was a better
yeah,
game than Denver. Although I agree, it was cool to watch in the snow. But
yeah,
anyways, we got some stuff to get into today. We got more with the coaching carousel. Within the last week, we have a lot to talk about. Kind of crazy how much can happen in a week. And then we are going to start our top 10 at each position. So we'll start with quarterbacks today. Basically, go over the top 10 for the season, weeks 1 through 17. So a cutout week 18. And we're just going to kind of talk about, guys, talk about what we think's going to happen for next year, what we want to do with that kind of thing. So, yeah, it'll be pretty exciting episode, and yeah, we'll go from there. But let's start with some of the news, like the coaching carousel. Let's just start with the Bills. So much going on there, the drama. Like they fire Sean McDermott after losing to Denver, then all of a sudden Philip Rivers is a head coaching candidate for them. And then their owner is talking about how Brandon Bean is great and they promoted him. And they're like, oh, Brandon Bean didn't want Keon Coleman. He took one for the team. It's like, you have to imagine Keon Coleman's not there next year. That's my gut instinct off of that. And I also think they're in just a really rough spot. It seems like McDermott's going to take a year off from the coaching kind of cycle and he'll hop back in the next one. That's what I'm hearing now. But I think it's crazy to say, oh, let's let Sean McDermott go. And now I think the top candidate for them, because guys continue to pull out over and over everywhere. Mike McDaniel was one of the guys who's pulled out. Grant Udinski recently just pulled out, although I think he's still in the running for the Bills, but he pulled out of the Browns head coaching job. So guys are pulling out left and right. You're like, what do you do? It really seems like Davis Webb, the Broncos passing game coordinator, is a true candidate for the Bills, and it just makes me question what the Bills are doing.
Yeah, no, I think the whole Keon Coleman thing is being blown a little out of proportion just because like he didn't even play for them really last year. Like I thought it was pretty clear like the writing was on the wall when he was had like even two straight healthy scratches. Like, all right, they don't believe in this guy. They didn't go their way. He's moving on next year. So I don't know why the owner's bringing that up. Like, all right, it was clearly that all parties involved thought it was a flop, and I don't know why he's a name on the presser conference. But regardless, yeah, I don't know. I'm surprised that a lot of guys are putting their names out, just because I feel like it's so rare that you enter a situation like a team that has a quarterback of Josh Allen's ability. Like not even just like of course he's never gotten it done, but that's a top three quarterback in the game. So I'm surprised that all these guys are pulling out of the running for it because, that's the biggest position crossed off the list that you don't need to worry about and you can kind of focus on other things. But yeah, it'll be interesting. Davis Webb is an interesting name. I really hadn't heard um that him linked to them, but I don't know. I like it. I think, he's been listed as this kind of quarterback guru guy for some different teams. So why not? I guess it can't get much, I don't know what they're doing firing McDermott, but hey, I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
mean, I'll add this too, right? Like he was once an NFL quarterback,
Yep.
um, and he's only 31 years old. So him and Grant Udinski, like those are at the same time, like those are the guys you take a shot on. So instead of going through like the recycling process of, oh, this guy's been a head coach before, let's see if he can do it for us now. It's like you take a shot at younger guys. We talked about it, I think, last week with Sean McVay. It was like Sean McVay was so young, and now he's one of the best head coaches in the league. So, in that regard, take a shot at the young guy if you can't get one of the studs. John Harbaugh was the clear stud. Stefanski was the clear number two. Those two went off the board quickly. So take your shot. I think that's a great idea. So, maybe Davis Webb could be something. I kind of wish he was a coordinator first, though, because it is kind of a big jump.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, but the only thing I question with like taking a shot on a guy you know, is like do they really have time to take a shot? Like Josh Allen's not getting any younger. Not that he's in that year of like clear regression showing up in the next year, but I don't know. I felt like maybe even like it sounds crazy, but I know Tomlin's not available. Even a guy like Mike McCarthy, just like just has been there, kind of has that name written all over him too, of that he can't get it done in the playoffs.
Mhm.
Like I don't know. Like just find a guy like that that's available where I don't know, but we'll see what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, I guess in that regard too, it's team specific. Like the Bills probably shouldn't be taking the shot because, as you're saying, they're a win now team.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
younger team, why not take the shot? Or a rebuilding team, sure. But I think I can agree with you there on the Bills. But speaking of Mike McCarthy, he's taking a job as the Pittsburgh Steelers head coach. I think that's a weird one. They are such in a win now mode, and it doesn't make sense. They need to hit the reset button. They don't have the quarterback. It seems like Will Howard's going to be the quarterback, and they're saying they liked Mike McCarthy the best because of how he develops quarterbacks. Sure, but you don't have the true guy to develop just yet. Like Will Howard is not the franchise answer. And sure, he could be a competent quarterback in the league, but he was like a seventh round pick. So I don't know how I feel about the Mike McCarthy pick. You got to hope they do something maybe at quarterback. If they went out and said, Malik Willis, you had some good moments in Green Bay. Why don't you come here to be our starting quarterback? That could make a lot of sense to me. But with them saying Will Howard's the guy, it feels a little questionable to me.
Yeah, you also wonder if it's like a last dash for a hope at Rodgers returning. You know, that history with McCarthy and Green Bay, of course, they won a Super Bowl together. So I don't know. That's definitely brought into question too. But yeah, it feels like the right like hire though. Like even if things don't go well, it's just like I don't know. Like what else are the Steelers gonna do? They've had this locker room guy and players coach of Mike Tomlin for years, 20 plus years. I mean, how do you really go from that much of a culture shift to like this young OC? Like, how much? I don't know. Maybe they're just trying to hold it on to hope for a couple more years of success or trying to reach the playoffs and then go full rebuild. That's my thought. I don't know. But yeah, Will Howard doesn't scream the guy at me.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I think it's kind of a wait and see moment with that
Yeah.
personally. The next guy up, the other head coach that was hired in the last week, Jesse Minter. He signs with the Baltimore Ravens as the head coach. He started his career there, and then he transitioned, I think, over to LA. Maybe he was somewhere else in between. I'm not entirely sure. I just do know he started in Baltimore, and most recently he was defensive coordinator for the Chargers. I I don't hate it. I think it could make a lot of sense for the team. I know he was a huge candidate for a lot of teams this year. A lot of teams were liking Jesse Minter. This is kind of a wait and see moment for me. I don't know if he's going to be one of those guys who turns out to be a stud of a head coach, or if it's going to be kind of a wash somewhere in the middle. So this roster's loaded. You got to think that the defense kind of turns back the clock like 2 years to when they were elite. This year they were awful. So I'm kind of expecting the defense kind of return to that typical Baltimore Raven form.
Yeah, no, I mean, not much fantasy relevance to this one just because of the obvious defensive focus coming from being a DC. But yeah, I mean, I think that's got to be the focus is that when I thought of Baltimore Ravens, of course you think Lamar, but it's also really good defenses that like pair well with Lamar's game. And that they is which is a reason why they've been so good these past, 5 years. But yeah, I gotta think that's the focus too. But not much fantasy relevance to this one, I don't think.
Yeah, wait for them to hire that offensive coordinator. Um, Speaking of, let's talk offensive coordinators. Mike McDaniel, this is the big one, signs with the Chargers. I love it, honestly. Like, he's pulled his name from some head coaching jobs, as I mentioned, and it really seems unlikely that he's going to take another job at this point. So, him being the guy with LA now, you got to imagine, like, him and Harbaugh is going to be such a pairing. I think Herbert could be in for a huge year. I think the receivers could be. I don't anticipate Keenan Allen returning, honestly, but Quentin Johnston, Lad McConkey, Gadsden could even improve off of this. And then my biggest beneficiary is Marion Hampton. We saw what they did with Devon Achane in Miami, and I think Hampton could be great. And that's one of the takeaways for me is just off rip, one of those kind of first hitters. Where do I think I'm going to like Hampton next year? First instinct. I haven't done my rankings, way too early for that, but I think he could end up like top 7 for me in my running back rankings. Like, I really like this fit. I like what I
Yeah.
saw from this year. So, huge news for the Chargers offense. It'll be fun for fantasy.
Yeah, no, pretty much spot on with everything. This is probably the biggest signing for fantasy relevance that we've seen in this coaching cycle. And it's honestly weird because, I think with a lot of these head coaches that, go back to being coordinators, their original position, it was a complete flop. Like Robert Saleh comes to mind as first, where the Jets just went horribly, and he was such a good coordinator in San Francisco, and it went horribly, and went back to San Francisco and went back to be doing what he does. But in this case, McDaniel, had some real success. He had playoff teams with the Dolphins. He had this record-breaking offense a couple of years ago. So it wasn't a complete flop. So this guy's has is very capable of putting together an elite offense. And it's a perfect fit because all the pieces are right there. And I think they're just looking for some offensive mind that isn't just run heavy, mix things up. Justin Herbert's a talented player. You have Amari Hampton, all the receivers, Gadsden, like you mentioned. So yeah, no, really exciting for this one to see how everything kind of plays out, what they draft, and then training camp.
Yep. Yeah, the next name is Bobby Slowick, signs as the Dolphins offensive coordinator. They stayed in house. I believe he was the passing game coordinator. So honestly, I think that's the right call. They've liked how the offense has run. I kind of anticipate things to be somewhat similar, and they'll want him to run it as similar as he can to what Mike McDaniel was doing. I don't think I have much else to talk about there.
Yeah, no, definitely a wait and see kind of thing of how that roster plays out because I mean, who knows who's going to come back, who's the quarterback, all that. So yeah, wait and see.
Definitely. Zach Robinson signs with Tampa Bay. So he was with Raheem Morris in Atlanta last year, and he's now left for an in division team. I don't really know what to take away from that. I think, this is just another situation. It's like the fifth offensive coordinator for Baker Mayfield in 5 years.
Yeah,
So I think, if anything, it should be an upgrade from Josh Grizzard last year. So I guess there's that. You got to hope they turn back to what they were doing because they had some very successful years in Tampa so far.
yeah.
Anything there?
No, gotta feel for Baker a little bit though. He's just been through it his career and he got paid, he had his success, but you gotta feel for the guy. He just can't get a regular OC or coach.
Yeah. Tommy Reese goes over with Stefanski from Cleveland to Atlanta, so he's the offensive coordinator there. I think that's fine. I think that's kind of a wait and see approach too. Maybe they'll involve the running backs pretty heavily, but we'll see what they decide to do at quarterback as well. Arthur Smith, I just wanted to put this in here because it's fun. He's gone.
Yeah,
Thank you, fantasy football gods.
yeah,
Arthur Smith goes to Ohio State, so he will no longer be terrorizing teams in fantasy football. He was a disaster with the Steelers this year too. We didn't know what to do, who to think of, is going to be good, who's not. So he won't be anything to worry about now. Um, and then lastly, I just wanted to bring up Jonathan Gannon signs as the defensive coordinator with Green Bay. I think it's a good hire. I just wanted to bring this one up because he was just the head coach in the last cycle, so thought it's an interesting name. And you as a Packers fan, wanted to hear your thoughts quick.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like the move as well. I think, like as I mentioned earlier, of head coach flops going back to their coordinator positions, it's worked out for the most part. So I think, this is a good rebound opportunity for him. I know I meant, but I'll repeat myself. Robert Saleh just did it, where it was a disaster with the Jets and then went back to his position and they were a playoff team and, did a lot with the little pieces he had on that defense with so many injuries. So I think it's a good opportunity for Gannon. But yeah, not much fantasy relevance, but yeah, good
I,
opportunity.
I think that's a huge decision for them, for the Packers.
Mhm.
I think it's a big time move to re-sign LaFleur over there to be the head
Yep.
coach for future. A lot of people, oh, they're writing him off. I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think that offense is really that good on paper. So what he's
No.
been able to do with this team, he's a great head coach. I think that's the right move. Bring in a guy like Jonathan Gannon to command the defense. I think they could be in for a great year.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely glad they didn't read too much into that narrative of, not being able to win the big one. But because like you said, like that receiving room, they've added to it, but it's really just a bunch of guys. Like there's no clear and, he did what he did with Jordan Love. And great development, in my opinion. Like Jordan Love's a very talented quarterback, and all things considered, it worked out. So yeah, but just gotta I'm sure it'll start to be on the hot seat a little more when if they keep losing in that first round or don't make it. So, but I'm glad they brought it back.
Yeah. All right, let's hop in here then. Let's do the top 10 quarterbacks plus a couple extra names for reasons such as injury, things like that, where they're still needed to get talked about. The first one, I'm going to kind of gloss over. Number one quarterback on the year. Again, I'm going weeks 1 through 17, so we're ignoring week 18. Quarterback one on the year, Josh Allen. He ended with averaging 23.4 fantasy points per game, a whole two higher than the next guy. We talked about this in the offseason. It was very clear for both of us that Josh Allen is QB1. Draft him over Lamar. Sure enough, he was the very clear, obvious choice, and he's been a QB2 like every year. So a
Yeah,
top two, I mean, rather like QB1 or two every single year. Like you're
yeah, I
not
think
missing
it's
with this guy. So
yeah, no, 7 or 8 straight seasons of either one or two. And the only time he got two was Lamar took him. took it from him in those like MVP years where Lamar was just going nuts. So yeah, no, not much else to say. That I think next year he'll be QB1 on everyone's board once again, including ours. I think we can speak that into existence.
Yeah.
Yeah, another monster year from Josh Allen. He just keeps doing it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. He should be QB1 going into next year.
Yeah,
Not much to take away there. QB2 on the year, Drake May, averaging 21.5 points a game. He had a great season, and I think this kind of goes towards, this is one of those late round guys you take a shot on with the rushing upside. And Drake May has that capabilities. Improved O line, improved passing core for him, the receivers. So it was just a better environment for him. Mike Vrabel, new head coach, way better than Gerard Mayo. We knew that the second they hired him. So it's like, all right, Drake May here is in a much better situation. Take a shot on a guy like that. And sure enough, he has a great season. And he won fantasy championships. I mean, 21 points, 24 points, 32 points in the last 3 weeks. That's a championship winner. That's a league winner right there. So Drake May, thoughts on him from this season?
yeah, no, I think it, like you mentioned before the season, he was kind of tossed around as a breakout potential kind of guy, yourself included. Obviously, being a Pats fan, had some,
Yeah.
belief in him. I was on the side of I don't know if it's this year. I thought maybe next year. I was obviously very wrong about Drake May and the Patriots, all things considered. But yeah, no, it's crazy. Like you said, I think that like the rushing upside means so much now in this age of like fantasy football. Um, we saw it last year with Jaden Daniels, this year with Drake May. It can really push you into that elite tier of fantasy quarterbacks where, of course, Josh Allen has it too. That's why he's QB1 every year because he scores rushing touchdowns and he gets rushing yards. But yeah, Drake May showed off the elite passing talent as well. So I can't say that I'll have him in my top three next year. I don't know. I don't know yet, but I don't think he's going anywhere from this like top 10. I think this is pretty much where he belongs in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know we were discussing my guys before we picked our three going into the season, and I was discussing how I might choose Drake May to be my guy. I didn't, but I did not expect him to be QB2.
Yeah.
You know, I still hit on my quarterback pick with Dak Prescott, but still, I mean, QB2 on the season for Drake May, you have to anticipate he's getting drafted in the top five quarterbacks again next year. And
Yep.
honestly, depending on what round that is, it might feel a little rich to be taking Drake May there. I know the rushing upside is there, but we saw it with Jaden Daniels this year. The schedule will be a lot tougher next year, a lot tougher. And we just said it through the playoffs. He hasn't looked the same at all. I don't even know what his fantasy output would be. Actually, let me find that right now. But it's just it wouldn't be nearly the same that we got this year. So as much as I'm a Patriots fan and I like Drake May, it does feel a little scary to be taking him as early as he could be going next year. And for the playoffs this year, these were his three outputs: 18 points, 14 points, and 15 points. It's not terrible. That rushing upside is there, and it certainly helps his overall numbers, and it will keep his floor relatively high. But as a top five QB, it might still be pretty difficult to want to take him so early.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I was honestly surprised that those were his outputs. I thought it was going to be worse.
Me
Honestly, he
too.
had
Yeah, me too.
yeah, he only had 80 passing yards last week.
Yeah.
So I mean yesterday. So but yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be tough to stay in that territory, especially just with the guys that are usually there. It's just so consistent. But that's his chance, to be in that elite fantasy tier next year. That'll be a clear sign of like if the NFL adjusts too heavily, do they figure some things out about him? Do they? So, but as of right now, I think, you're right that it will probably be in that top five position just because of the production last year. So it'll be interesting to judge where people are at with him once we get into drafts for next year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as you said yesterday, he threw for 80 yards.
Yeah.
His rushing, like numbers alone, he had like 60 something yards rushing and a touchdown. So that's 12 points on the ground alone. So
Yeah.
there's that upside. You have a high floor when you're a mobile quarterback. And, before we even get into the next few names, I think that's a really good point to bring up right now is that if you can take a rushing quarterback, they always have higher upside, even a higher floor. They just continue to produce better than those stationary quarterbacks who get all their points through the air. So, you know, the next name up, stationary guy, but it was a legendary season. Borderline MVP, QB3 on the year, Matthew Stafford. So that's one of those scenarios where it's like, Stafford was being drafted around quarterback 20, I think, last year. So crazy good season for him. But those are with MVP numbers to get up to QB3, right? No rushing at all. And he threw for what, 44 touchdowns? And it's something like that, upper
47,
4,000s.
I think. 47. Unless
Jeez.
he had a couple of rushing touchdowns, but I think he had 47 total touchdowns.
Sheesh. Yeah, and he threw for a ton of yards, right? I think he led the
Yes.
league in yards. So,
Yep.
you know, when you have a quarterback like Stafford who can just sling it and he has Puka and Devontae Adams to throw to, those are the kind of guys, the pocket passers that you can target. But, sticking with that narrative real quick, the rushing upside of the quarterbacks is always really beneficial to have. But Matthew Stafford, what a year. I I think, there's a lot to be said about the guy doing it at this age. I mean, they just went to the conference championship. He'll probably win MVP this season. So it's really cool to see what Matthew Stafford has done. But what are your thoughts on his season?
No, I think that's a good, first of all, I think that's a good example that you bring up of like how much rushing upside means because statistically, Matthew Stafford had a much better year than Josh Allen, and you could argue Drake May as well. But like it just goes to show Josh Allen's going to have 10 plus rushing touchdowns, just more points. So I think that's a good point of like what it takes to be a pocket passer in this league and be fantasy relevant. You need a lot. You need to do a lot. But his season, I think it goes to show that like sometimes we overthink situations. And, thinking back on it, when you look at that offense of Devontae, Puka, Devontae is going to have 10 plus touchdowns. Puka's probably going to have 10 plus touchdowns.
Mhm.
They're going to have like 1,500 plus. Puka's going to have 1,500 plus yards. Devontae's going to have 1,200 plus. And then you just think about that, like, but Stafford's the QB 20. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like, there's so many points to be had, and someone has to get those guys the ball. So I think looking back on it, it's like, I think sometimes we need to just evaluate situation and not overthink I know he had some injury stuff going into the year, stuff like that, which is a notable concern. But you know, I think we have to be like, well, why can't this guy finish above his ADP when he's surrounded by this and these guys will get these stats? But yeah, an incredible year. I think he deserves the MVP. Drake May, another notable name, but to me, I think just what Stafford did sort of so consistently, like 3 touchdowns a game almost, passing the ball is so impressive. But yeah, I think it goes to show like next year how we evaluate some QBs. I might take that into account. Like, oh, listen, I'm going to stand by the situation, and like this guy's going to have a decent year or a good year. So yeah.
Yeah, I think honestly, I'm gonna be nervous about taking Stafford next year. I mean, age
Oh
is a
yeah, sure.
factor. Then you got to consider too the last like 3 years he's been awful for fantasy. So when you consider how bad he's been in the last few years, it's like it really turned around by bringing in Devontae Adams. So it's
Yeah,
pretty cool to
seriously.
see like one guy can really make the difference. But yeah, for next year, right? What do you do with Stafford? Like I think personally, I'm gonna have him probably right outside the top 12, somewhere around that range. I think age is a factor, and then the pocket presence, right? He's a pocket passer, so he's not going to have. I just don't think he hits these numbers again at his age and with everything there. So, I think there's just a lot to consider. The situation's still great, as you mentioned, but I think he'll be right outside that top 12 for me.
I agree. No, I agree completely. And I feel like everything I just said, you'd think you'd be like, oh, I'm all in on Stafford. I think it's just because it's already happened, it's hard to repeat. So I think
Yeah.
what I was mentioning is like you got to get ahead of it and like be like, all right, how's this going to go? We obviously saw how it went, but now, like you mentioned, his price is going to be at a premium
Yep.
or somewhat of a premium. But yeah, I think he feels better as some sort of guy that if you want to take a shot as on someone like a Drake May or like something like that, that this next quarterback that you think is going to enter that upper echelon tier, I feel good about having him as a QB too. And like sort of that backup floor option where if this guy's healthy, he's gonna get close to 250 yards a game and throw you two or three touchdowns. So I sort of agree with that outside the top 12 ranking that you just mentioned. So yeah, it sucks to say because the guy just threw for 47 touchdowns, but it is hard to repeat those seasons, even at his ability and how he's been doing it for 20 plus years. So
Yeah. QB4 on the season, Trevor Lawrence, not too far behind Matthew Stafford. He had an awful start to the year and turned it up late. I think a lot of this can go into who the coaches are too, right? The same thing. Drake May turned it around after having a good coach in Mike Vrabel. Liam Cohen comes in for the Jaguars, and Trevor Lawrence has a career year. Nobody has seen this from Trevor Lawrence. Nobody expected this from Trevor Lawrence, and sure enough, he had an unbelievable season. I think heading into next year, I'm really curious to see where the public's going to be at with him. Where is he going to be going? Is he going to be, around QB7 or is he going to be QB12 and people are still a little bit off him? I know I personally think this might be here to stay to an extent. I think it'll fall off from QB4, but I think, maybe that 9 to 12 range, I think that's completely appropriate. And I think if Trevor Lawrence is available there, as of right now, I think that's a great place to take him. Look at all the weapons he has, too, the coaching. It's going to be really interesting to see. Trevor Lawrence is going to be quite the discussion next year.
I do agree, and it because it felt like for the whole entire year, the Jaguars just kept winning. And you're like, all right, when's this going to stop? When's this going to go away? The
Yeah.
Jaguars aren't good. They're never good. Like, when is it going to stop? And it just didn't. Like, including into the playoffs, they played a very competitive game with Buffalo. Um, we could be talking about them, honestly, if they win that game with Buffalo against Buffalo going in against the Patriots. Maybe that's a better, but who cares? It's he say. But just to be point out how good of a year they had. But yeah, I do agree. Like I do think I was just looking, he had 9 rushing touchdowns and 350 yards. I think that's a little bit of an outlier number in terms of rushing touchdowns. So tack that down to like five, maybe drops a couple spots. But I do think he deserves to be in there. I think he showed that, and the weapons aren't changing. Coaching situation isn't changing. So yeah, I don't think that's unrealistic or bold at all to say that 9-12. Like I think I think people will draft him at a higher clip, like above nine. So we'll definitely see what happens. But I think he deserves it. He kind of struggled his first 3 years in the league. People calling him a bust, comparing him to all these other quarterbacks that, have gotten all this crap for not playing well, and he doesn't really get it. And then he finally had a year where, all right, this guy was the number one pick for a reason. So yeah, I good for him, but it'll be interesting to see. I think it could be another situation like you mentioned with Drake May of like, is this guy being overdrafted? So we'll see.
Yeah, I think the rushing upside or the rushing stats you bring up is a great point too, right? Because he's never done that before, so you have to imagine it drops back down a little bit. Another note with the rushing is that Travis Etienne, great year for him, but Travis Etienne is now an impending free agent. So if they don't
Mhm.
bring Travis Etienne back, maybe they roll out Tootin as the three down guy, but I kind of anticipate then some of it's going to be going to Trevor Lawrence still. So I'll still imagine that the touchdowns drop from 9 to probably 5 or lower, but still like that's still some good numbers for him,
Oh
and
yeah.
we could see a pretty solid year from Trevor Lawrence once again.
Yep.
QB5, Dak Prescott. This is a guy who we've talked about. I talked him up all offseason. I said this is a guy you want to draft, get him because of the weapons around. And I think this is almost like the Matthew Stafford situation, as you said. It's like, okay, well, they have CeeDee Lamb. Their defense is awful. They have CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens now, too. They have Jake Ferguson. They just had everything around them. And that's what we had talked about is it felt like a dream scenario for Dak Prescott, who, by the way, Dak hasn't had a bad year like Stafford has had. So it felt weird for Dak to be so low. The only bad years he's had was because of injury. I think every other season was like top 8, and he even had a QB3 season once. So it just felt like it was hard for Dak to have a bad season. Sure enough, QB5. This is kind of a pocket passer too, who he's just going to sling it. But this is another one of those scenarios where, based on the situation, you got to evaluate that. I think Dak's going to probably fall around QB 8 to 10 once again. People just don't like the Cowboys. They don't like Dak. I think Dak could maybe be a value once again next year. We'll see where Pickens ends up, if he ends up back in Dallas or not. But this could be another good year for Dak next year because the way the offense is working and with the defense being so bad.
Yeah, no, like you mentioned, this was one that we were both kind of all over at the beginning of the year. We had him across value episodes, ADP, whatever it was. We had Dak in almost every episode where it was something about someone you should draft. And we were right. I think, the situation played a big role, like you mentioned, with Pickens having an opportunity and obviously CD Lamb. But yeah, it's honestly kind of crazy. I was looking into the numbers and this was one of his best fantasy finishes ever, and he had a QB2 year. So I think that goes to show um, how good the quarterback position is right now for fantasy of so many guys just kind of putting up numbers. But he was 10 or 20 points off from his top fantasy finish ever, or points wise. So yeah, great year for Dak, and it felt pretty quiet. Like I didn't really, of course,
Yeah.
we know that Dak's having a good year because we're watching the games. We have him rostered on some teams, but he wasn't like this mainstream, like, whoa, look at the year Dak Prescott's having. Like quietly, just in fantasy, he had a really good year and won people leagues probably because of the spot you drafted him at. So yeah,
Yeah, 3 points off of Trevor Lawrence, by the way. So if Trevor only ran for 8 touchdowns, which is still a great year, we're talking Dak QB4 on the season. So this was a great year for Dak. It'll be real interesting to see what the weapons look like heading into next year and where the public is on him. But I think he might be a value once again, as I mentioned. QB6, Caleb Williams. What a year for Caleb Williams. Another situation. There's Mike Rabel, there is Liam Cohen, and now there's Ben Johnson coming in. And Caleb Williams had a great year. He's a quarterback 6 on the year. There's about a 20-point drop off between Dak and Caleb Williams, and he nearly tied the next two guys as well. There's literally a point five difference between the next three names, including Caleb Williams, that we're going to talk about. So, keep that in mind. Caleb Williams was this close to being the QB 8 versus 6, but overall, it was a great season. The weapons are there. We're starting to see what they've decided to do. It looks like Colson Loveland is their guy. They want him to be the number one. Maybe Roma Dunze's the two. Who knows where DJ Moore is going to be? Luther Burden, they're like, okay, nope, we drafted this guy. Let's get him involved. So there's a lot of weapons. It'll be interesting to see kind of how they decide to use the pecking order. But Caleb Williams also has mobile ability too. So I think Caleb Williams could be a fun name again next year. I feel like if he ends up going around QB6, it'll be too high for my liking. But Caleb Williams will be an interesting name going into next year as well.
yeah, no, Caleb Williams really put it all on display this year. I mean, he had a lot to prove coming into this year. Um, but this might be a really hot take. I think like his arm talent is right up there with Mahomes
Yeah.
in the league. Like I think it's right Mahomes then Caleb Williams in terms of the throws that this guy can make. It's really ridiculous, and he showed in the playoffs, all season long that this guy can make any throw you need him to. And it finally produced in some fantasy success this year. But yeah, I think it also goes to show that, when they draft guys early, like Luther Burden and Colston Loveland, they're gonna play. And that showed at the end of the year that those turned into his top two guys for the most part with Odunze out. But yeah, great year from Caleb Williams. And I really think it's something to continue for him. But like you mentioned, you got to monitor the price, the ADP of where you're getting him at because there isn't that much of a rushing upside. I mean, there is. He runs the ball, but it's not to the level of guys at the top like Drake May or Josh Allen getting in the end zone. So yeah, I don't I think there's a little bit of a teardrop when it comes to him in that respect, but great year overall.
Yeah, yeah. I think if he were to start running more too, we're talking about a top three QB. So
Oh yeah.
I feel like there's a wide range of outcomes with Caleb Williams, so that's why it'll be a fun talk next year. But yeah,
Hmm.
arm talent for sure. As long as he improves the accuracy, like this guy could finish as the overall QB1. So
Yep.
yeah, I was never a believer in Caleb, but it's hard not to believe after the year he's had. So
Yep.
the QB7, which was point 0.3 points behind Caleb Williams, was Bo Nix. Bo Nix, it felt like such a bad year. For him to finish at QB7 honestly kind of shocks me. But he had some great weeks in there, like that 38-point week. So, when you consider it in that regard, like Bo Nix, he was up and down, but of course the points came. He can pop off at any time, any given moment. Bo Nix, QB7, if he's around that price tag next year, it's going to be very hard to take him there. I mean, he went at like QB9 this year, I think, and that even felt a little high. I know people weren't really big fans of him. Their defense is also just so good. They don't need to be passing all the time. And I think that defense will be, once again, top three in the league. So I almost anticipate a drop off once again. I know we kind of anticipated a drop off this year, and he finished, I want to say, at QB7 now the past 2 years in a row. But yeah, it feels like there's just a drop off that's destined to happen. So I don't know. How do you feel about Bo Nix?
Yeah, it's interesting because at the beginning of the year, I think I know I was on record saying that or questioning if he has hit his fantasy peak, which sounded crazy. But just off the fact of like a top, I think he finished as QB6 last year. So I was like, will he ever surpass that? Does he have the ability to do that? Clearly, I mean, I think he is capable of that because of the fact that he's stuck around. And like you mentioned, it felt like a bad year. Like it felt like a
Yeah.
really bad year for Bo Nix, where it was a clear drop off. I would if someone told me he finished outside the top 12, like, I would be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But here he is at 7. So I don't know. I think it's something to consider going to next year. Like, well, we kind of doubted this guy. Then he goes out and finishes above his ADP, and finishes right around where I said he couldn't ever do again in his career. So I don't know. I think it's something to monitor. I think, the situation is just so fluent. Like it's just going to be that case every year. I don't imagine them going out to get a big time receiver. They kind of feel like one of these teams where they invest money elsewhere, and kind of do what they can with the guys that they draft or develop. So I think it's another situation with the rushing upside as well. Like he has some rushing upside. He will get in the end zone. He got in the end zone 5 times rushing this year. So I don't know what that compares to 2 years ago, but I think it's a name that like you may be at that spot if it's not 8, 9, 10 again. Like maybe you take a shot on him. You're gonna have bad weeks, but you're also gonna have really good weeks. So we'll see. I don't know how I feel about him yet, but I know I can't doubt him anymore.
Yeah, My only issue with Bo Nix is, although he can pop off at any time, he had 5 weeks where he lost you the week because he had 13 or less points. That five is a lot to have that little. So that's my concern with Bo Nix is it's just really inconsistent. Like I much prefer some consistency over that kind of inconsistency. But yeah, it'll be interesting. Another one where it's like, what do we do with this guy? And we're
Yep.
noticing really outside of Josh Allen, it's like, what are we doing with some of these guys? So it'll be fun to rank and talk quarterbacks heading into next year.
Yep.
QB 8 now, we have Jalen Hurts, who was zero point 0.2 points behind Bo Nix and zero point 0.5 behind Caleb Williams. So it was not a good year for Jalen Hurts. Like, not at all. He had some real bad games. The offense as a whole was not good. I'll say this. I think Jalen Hurts is going to be top five for me once again next year. I just can't imagine with the rushing upside that I'm gonna be able to put him lower. They're still in discussion with, I know, Brian Daboll for offensive coordinator, but they're bringing in a new guy and it could be a big name. Like this is a coveted position here. So I know it was a down year. It was a really bad year to have Jalen Hurts. He finished as a QB8. If he had one more point, he would have finished as a QB6, and we wouldn't be talking about it so much as a down year. But
Mm.
as down as it felt, like I feel like Jalen Hurts has so much upside. So I think I'm gonna be pretty bullish on him next year because I think the public is gonna drop on him, and I think they're gonna have him QB6, QB7, and I think he should be a clear top 5 option next year.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I feel like it could be a situation where this is a value if he falls out of that top five, because that is where he belongs. I mean, down year more so on the rushing side. I think, he had 400 yards rushing this year, 420. Um, every other year of his career, besides his first one, he had above 600 and over 700 in a couple years as well. He only had 8 rushing touchdowns. Every other year, he had over 10, besides his rookie year. Um, throwing stats are honestly some of the better in his career. Not better in his career, but closer to the middle of the pack of he threw for the most touchdowns he ever has. So like it a lot of bad things happened, but I think for fantasy wise, it was bad on the rushing end, which showed in his end of the year ranking. I think if he scores a few more touchdowns, gets a couple hundred more yards, he's right back in that top five. No one's worried about it. So if people do overreact, like you said, I think it's a great opportunity because really fantasy wise, it wasn't far off from being like a top five year. So yeah, I would love to draft Jalen Hurts outside of the top five QBs if that's where he's at.
Hmm. Yeah, QB, what are we at? 9 now. Justin Herbert. We talked about it, and I think Justin Herbert, there were some really good moments early on in the season. It's like, wow, Justin Herbert is going to have a great year. And then he kind of fizzled out. But with Mike McDaniel now as the offensive coordinator, I just hope the public's not too high on him because I'm going to be in on Justin Herbert next year. And the
Yeah.
rushing numbers were much better for him this year than they have been in his career. So I think Justin Herbert's another name where I'm going to be pretty excited to see where he goes, and hopefully the public's out on him and I can take him in almost every league because I think he could be in for a big year.
Yeah, no, that first half of the year, like you mentioned, I mean, I thought he was on the QB1 pace.
Yeah.
Not to challenge
Yeah.
Josh Allen, but it was that serious of a year. He had, up until week 9, he had 5 games of over 25 plus fantasy points. So he was having a monster year, and we talked about him a lot going into this year. Or at least I did, I think. And, he was paying off big time and then some. So, it's there. And we always knew it was there for Herbert. That's why we talk him up so much it's a funny narrative because he never wins the big game and he's Mr. What If, but he does produce like that's not a question. He's a stats guy through and thick and through. And so you know, I agree. I think with the McDaniel situation, it could bring some hype to his name and the Chargers overall. But he wasn't a cheap asset overall. I think he was usually. I mean, this past year, he might have been. He was probably outside the top 10 of QBs drafted ADP wise. But yeah, I think another opportunity for a monster year for him, and continue off of what he did this year.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I anticipate him being outside the top 10 for sure. I'd be shocked if he's higher because the end of the season is what you remember, and it just wasn't good. It really
Yep,
wasn't. He had
yep,
one week, I want to say it was against Dallas in week 16, and
yep.
just popped
That
off.
was his high. That was
Yeah,
his highest scoring game.
yeah,
So,
30 points. So,
yep,
um, yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I hope the public is off so we can go grab him everywhere. We'll
yep.
see what happens there. Number 10, the first guy to not play all 16 games between weeks 1 and 17, Patrick Mahomes, who only got 14 of those 16 games played. He still finished as the quarterback 10 on the season. It was a great year for Mahomes. He was running a lot. He was using his legs a lot. They had to throw. The defense wasn't as good this year, so he just had to do more this year. They've been running a very much run style, winning type of football offense because they didn't have to do much to keep up in games. And this year they lost a lot of games. They missed the playoffs. They had to throw to stay in. Mahomes had to run because their running backs, Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt, couldn't do a thing. So you have to imagine they invest in the running back position this offseason. You have to imagine that they do something to invest, maybe even in a receiver, because Xavier Worthy did not do much this year. So
Mhm.
I think they invest in the offense, and depending on what they can do, I think we could be in for another big year from Mahomes. It'll be tough to have him outside the top 10, even coming off an ACL injury. It's just, it's Patrick Mahomes. And that's what we had talked about even going into this season. It's like, all right, we can't have him too low. And the writing was on the wall for him to fall off. And, he had his moments where there were just not many good games once he had tough schedules or tough games in the schedule of the season. But other than that, he was so, so good this year. And it's like, we'll see how far the media and the public wants to put him down because of the injury and everything. But I don't know. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, no, I mean, this was a great year, like you mentioned, and just to put more emphasis on it, the only 14 games played, he's only 25 points behind Caleb, or I could be wrong. Or how many points behind was he Caleb Williams? I think I'm looking at a different
Let me
site.
find out. I'm on Fantasy Pros right now, but he was 10 points behind Caleb Williams, 10 total. So
So, I mean, this
QB
guy, this is an
QB 10 to 6 was close.
yeah, and this is an easy top five finish for him if he plays those last three games. So, you know, that just shows right there how good of a year this was because he missed three games and he he was still in the top 10. So
He
it's
was
obviously still there. And like you mentioned, there's additions to come to this offense. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with Rashee Rice? This guy just can't stay out of trouble. But I think it's sort of nothing, not nothing, but like just suspension wise, he'll play. Um, Worthy's back, and if they get a guy like Jeremiah Love
yeah.
at running back, it's just right back to these dominant Chiefs offenses that we've known, hopefully. So, yeah, I don't think Mahomes is going anywhere. The ACL doesn't do much for me. It's like I'll still draft Patrick Mahomes. But hopefully that creates a discount in a lot of ways, and we
Yeah.
know he can do it still. It was never a question for us, but a lot of people started to question it. So, it's there. Hopefully, we can get him at a discount.
Yeah, and I like averages more than total points personally, just because when guys miss games, this and that, I think average is an important number to look at. Mahomes finished fourth, QB4 in average points per game. So when you
Wow.
consider that, it's like, okay, like Mahomes was really, really good, even with that kind of slower end to the season where he was, 14 points, 8 points, 29, 18, 14, 11. Like, there were a lot of bad weeks toward the end of his season. So when you consider the average, it's like, okay, no, this guy is still him. Um, I'm gonna list off a couple other names that are important to mention, and there's one name I particularly want to stop on, but we can have discussion on any other names you might want to stop on too. Jared Goff was the QB 11, Baker Mayfield QB 12, Jordan Love QB 13, Sam Darnold QB 14, Daniel Jones QB 15,
Wow.
Jackson Dart QB 16. That I'll stop there. Jackson Dart is one name in particular. I think he could be in for a huge year with John Harbaugh there now as the head coach. There's a lot of talent there. He'll have Malik Neighbors back. He'll have Cam Scadaboo. Just like I said, Hampton off rip is almost like a top 7 RB for me going into next year. I think Dart's going to be a top 5 quarterback for me. I'd be surprised if he's much lower. He averaged 17 points a game, which honestly wasn't that good in comparison to the other quarterbacks. But when you consider that two of those games were absolute stinkers, including like the first game he came in and it was like negative zero point 0.3 points, he had quite a good season. So
Mhm.
we're talking about that average almost going up like 3 whole points. And then it's like, okay, well, Dart is a QB, top 8 QB on this season. So that's a name I wanted to bring up. I don't know if you have anything you want to add on Dart there or any of those guys I just mentioned.
No, I completely agree with you on Dart. The hype is real because of how he produced in a situation that wasn't all that good. I think
Yep.
Malik Neighbors going down, Scatterbo going down, and he showed he could do a lot on his own in the run game, especially. But I do think it's another name where how hype or how far this hype goes. I'm already seeing across social media of guys, saying what you just said of this is a top five quarterback in my
Yep.
mind, which is could be very true, but when a guy hasn't had that top five season, you're drafting him at a top five price, then it gets kind of out of control for me. That's kind of where I want out. Because he hasn't done it yet. You don't want to get burned on a guy that you believe you're already calling top five, and then he doesn't do it, and you're like, oh yeah, he didn't have a top five season before. But
Yeah.
like we've mentioned, you have to get ahead of these things sometimes, and you have to take that shot to get that production on your team. So yeah, no, I think he's definitely capable of it. I just wonder if the hype will go too far and, people are drafting him ahead of some of these names that we just mentioned that have done it for multiple years in a row.
Yeah. Yeah, the rushing upside is certainly there with
Mhm.
Dart. I'm gonna name a few guys who had injury-riddled seasons who all went top five in quarterback, and I want you to just say, where you think you'll have them ranked going into next year. And those three names, Lamar Jackson finished the highest in only 12 games. He had QB 20 on the season. Joe Burrow QB 33, and Jane Daniels also tied for QB 33. Both Burrow and Daniels only played 7 games. So those three guys, where do you think you'll have them for next season?
Yeah, that's a good question. Wow. And that just like honestly talking about these top 10, I honestly just forgot about those guys somehow. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, we still have these three elite quarterbacks that from a fantasy and real life perspective. I think I have mm, I wanted to say I have Burrow ahead of Lamar. Like I wonder if at this point are we kind of hitting that peak of or just like the regression period of Lamar's career? And I know that's the easy opinion right now just because of the injury, but I don't think Lamar's too close behind him. I think all those guys are in my top 10 for sure.
Yeah.
Um, I think you could even for Lamar and Joe, I think you could argue my top six. I think that's where I'm at right now for them. Jaden for me falls, he's definitely in the top 10, like I mentioned, but I don't know, all those guys feel really close to me. Like right behind each other. I think the days of Lamar finishing top three are done. That just
Yeah.
might be too early to say that, but it just doesn't feel good right now of like him bouncing back in a massive way.
Yeah, I think for me, a safe opinion would be to have these three guys back to back to back, 4 through 6. I think
Yeah.
that's kind of appropriate. I think the rushing upside for Lamar and Jaden is there, and then Burrow has all the weapons. So it's like, I think those two things you have to consider. Um, so we'll see. I mean, we talked about some big time names today. I have one more name I want to bring up, because it's based off of overall average. The QB2 in average points a game this season was Brock Purdy, who finished who finished the season as like the QB 24 because he only played 8 games. He played one more game than Burrow and Daniels and finished almost 10 spots higher than them. He had an unbelievable season in the games he played. I mean, I just, to me, Purdy is going to be a value next year. I think nobody's going to remember this. I think he's going to be around QB 12. He'll be in that kind of Trevor Lawrence, Matthew Stafford, Brock Purdy. I think that's going to be like a tier 10 through 12. And I think Purdy's going to be such a value next year. So I'm very in on Purdy heading into next year, and it's just a name I want to mention because of how high that average was.
Wow, yeah, that's a crazy call. Like I knew Brock Purdy was having a great end to the year, but wow, I didn't know that was, the situation he was in terms of average points per game. Yeah, I think you're spot on with like that could definitely be a massive value. And I think it just speaks to the like how loaded the quarterback position right now is for fantasy. You know, we just talked through a whole top 10 and they're like, oh, then we also have Lamar, Joe Burrow, and Jaden Daniels who
Yep.
had down years due to injury. So then those guys have to be fit in somewhere. So I think we're talking about a lot of value right here, where like guys like Jalen Hurts, Jackson Dart, like fall to the end of that top, like they definitely follow the top five. Um, and just because of not because of they maybe they don't deserve it, but there have just been guys who have been doing it more recently and did it last year, and they're going to be the recency bias. So, you know, I think it's going to be a crazy board to rank, and I think it also goes to show of how much like things can change from the beginning of the year. I know we're running like pretty long on time, but you know, our rankings, I don't think we're anywhere close to this. So like we had a bunch of names off, and everyone else included of like where you think the position. It doesn't. There's always going to be names. There's always going to be guys who get injured. It's just how it works. But
Yeah.
super interesting to kind of look back on all this.
Yeah. Just a quick hit on like the quarterback position, how important it is, right? We're not including Purdy, Lamar, Burrow, or Jaden Daniels in this, by the way, because this is off of total points. But there were 12 quarterbacks who finished higher than the RB7 on the year. So it's like, and that's in PPR. Like if we're to look here, um, let's look at wide receivers real quick. And it's like when you're considering this, right? It's like quarterbacks get a ton of points regardless of the situation. Like there were only six, looks like six wide receivers would have finished higher than the top 12 quarterbacks. Like it's very, very deep of a position right now. So that almost begs the question, do you wait and just draft the quarterback late? I mean, Josh Allen ran away with the QB1 title. He finished well above the rest, but it's still a question to consider. Like what do you do here? And I think it's going to be very, very fun conversation going into next year with all the names that are going to be there.
Yeah, I'm gonna take it even a step further of like I think we talked about a little bit. I forget what episode, but you know, I think I mentioned Josh Allen does this year in and year out,
Mhm.
QB one or two for 7 or 8 straight years. Why wouldn't you take him in the second round? Like why not? You know what you're gonna get. The guy doesn't get hurt. He just keeps on producing. I think it even gets crazy to the point of like, could you take him in the first round? Like this crazy production where it's leaps, it's such a big gap from the QB1 to QB2 where like this guy, every roster I looked at in fantasy, like they all have Josh Allen in the championship, or like everyone has, he's got your team's going to the semis. Like, so I don't know, maybe that's a little aggressive, but I think it's like something I might start to try and look at of like, where can you take Josh Allen and it not be a crazy reach because he's that good for fantasy?
Hmm. Yeah, it will be an interesting conversation because you also want to consider who are the guys around you that you're missing out on
Yeah,
because
of course. Yeah.
because quarterback is a deeper position as we just mentioned. So if you could get a guy with only 100 points less versus a running back who is going to be 100 points more than the RB8 on the season, which very much like Christian McCaffrey, I think had 150 more points than the RB7. So it's like when you consider it that way too, it's like, all right, maybe you do go for these positions that are more top heavy. But
Yep.
that'll be a conversation for next week because we will be doing the running backs next week. That'll be a fun conversation. Um, we did run a little long on time, about an hour, so hopefully we can trim that down a little. I know the hours are long to listen to, but
Yep.
yeah, I mean, fun episode. This will be a lot of fun to keep talking positions, talk about guys, and what do we think for next year? And just off rip, running backs, it'll be starting with Christian McCaffrey, and hopefully we'll have more coaching news to talk about as well. So we'll see y'all in the next episode.
Peace.